Welcome to the Nairobi Health Show, everybody. I've got Dr. Michael Biamonte here on the show. Dr. Michael, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Dave.
I'm excited. You've got several specific areas of expertise, but today I really want to focus in on Candida, as it's such an important topic. It's a misunderstood topic, and you have made it a real passion and journey and become a real expert in the field.
Yes, I've written a book called The Candida Chronicles, which explains my journey in studying Candida and how I got interested in it. And to give you the short version of that, when I first got out of naturopathic school in 1984, I began working with a group of independent researchers who were working for Grumman. They were independent contractors, I should say. They were working for Grumman Aerospace out on Long Island, and their job was to build a computer software program where they could analyze the astronauts' blood tests in order to determine what nutrients they would need while they were on the space station in long outings, because you have problems when you're in a zero gravity area for a long time. And it was through the use of that computer system that I became interested in Candida, because we started to apply this computer system to different doctors and their private practices, including our practices, because we were all individual practitioners as well as being researchers for Grumman. And we all had patients, and we were using the computer on patients, and most of the patients did really well. They would submit their tests. We'd have the computer run their blood tests. The computer would tell us what vitamins they needed. The people had diabetes, osteoporosis, all these illnesses reversing. But there was this 30% of the people that had bizarre reactions to the vitamins. The vitamins, they couldn't tolerate them. It made them worse. They had crazy side effects. So I volunteered to find out what was wrong with these people. And eventually, after a few years, I found out they had Candida. No, I didn't really know much about Candida. I didn't know about it. I thought it was some flaky thing from California, for all I knew. But but when I really started to research it, and I went to the mycology books and studied it, and I saw how it affected humans, it all made sense. So I started to tell these people, go to your doctor, tell them you have Candida, have him cure you, and then come back and we'll put you back on the program. Well, they went to their doctors. They had all kinds of responses. The doctors told them, I don't know anything about it. There's no such thing about it, even though it's in all the medical books. They had varied responses. So
what year about was it? What time frame are we talking?
This is 1984, 85. So they came back and they told me this, and I said, wow, that doesn't make sense. So I knew that there were doctors I knew who knew about Candida, and they were some of the more prominent functional medical doctors at that time in New York City who I was friends with. There was Dr. Robert Atkins, who everyone's heard of. There was Ronald Hoffman. There were quite a few of the prominent, functional medical doctors, as we call them now, in Manhattan. So I sent my patients there. And they came back and they said, well, this was much better. He knew he knew about this. And he put me on a program. He put me on a medicine. I got better for a while, but then I kept relapsing. So I said, oh, I'm going to have to figure out what this is all about. And here we are today.
One of the things that caught my attention as you talked about that is I remember computers in 1984. My cell phone is more powerful than that today.
Yeah,
right. And so you were working with probably very low level tech.
Linux. It was Linux. It was table driven programs at that time, which for us was perfect, because when you're trying to put together a model of the human body physiologically, having it being table driven is ideal, because if it's table driven, when you learn something new, you can just take the function and pop it where it's supposed to go, as opposed to rewriting the whole program.
Okay, so you had to learn about Candida. Give us, as a professional, I understand you could probably spend an hour on this first question, but to the best of your ability, give us a simple definition. What is Candida?
Well, Candida is a yeast or a fungus. It's called a dimorphic organism. Technically, it's under the heading of mycology, which is the study of yeasts or fungus, for that matter. Candida can switch itself back and forth from a yeast structure to a fungal structure. And it's normal to find Candida in the body. Like birds, for instance, have a very prominent level of Candida. All mammals have Candida to different degrees.
Okay.
And it's considered to be part of your normal biome in your intestinal tract. The problem is when it overgrows. See, the friendly bacteria that live in your intestinal tract, the bifidus and the acidophilus strains, use Candida as almost like a food source. So that keeps the population under control. But just like with any other food chain, if you kill off the organisms that are eating the smaller fish, then those smaller fish start to grow wild and out of control. So if you kill the acidophilus and the bifidus or disturb it in any way, the friendly bacteria in your gut, Candida starts to overgrow. Now, Candida releases various toxins, which are normally part of its metabolism, but they're really problematic to human beings. It ferments and releases alcohol. It releases mycotoxins, which are fungal-related toxins that affect your nervous system. There are tons and tons and tons of different toxic things that the Candida releases in your body that then cause a whole host of symptoms.
And so is it difficult to diagnose then?
Not if you know about it. If you don't know about it, you can go crazy trying to figure it out, because Candida releases so many different toxins that cause so many different symptoms. And the release of those toxins varies depending on your diet, your body temperature, your hormones, the weather. You see? So there are so many different things that can affect it that you would go crazy trying to figure this out if you didn't have some kind of idea where you were looking. Because you'd have symptoms that would be triggered on days when you ate certain foods but not others, when the weather is more humid than not, and you'd have to really keep a log for quite a while to try to figure out where the stimulators are coming from so that you know what to look for.
How many people are affected by overgrowth of Candida, do you think?
Well, we would estimate at any given time it's 30% of the U.S. population is affected by Candida. Most people don't know it. The problem is that you develop Candida typically by taking certain medications. Yes, it's true. You can. The American Indians, for instance, had an herb that was called wild carrot root, and we know it now as lomadium. And they used to brew this herb and they used to give it to people who were sick when they had some kind of ceremonial things. And they noticed the people got better. These people had a condition they called furry tongue, which we now know as thrush, when you get so much yeast in your mouth that your tongue turns white. So it was known back then under those circumstances. As we come closer to modern times, it wasn't really known except for vaginal yeast infections in women, you see. So it's very difficult to understand, because most people, if you say Candida or yeast, they think of vaginal yeast infections. They don't know that it lives in your intestines. That's the predominant place that Candida resides, is your small intestine and your colon. And it's fine when it's there and it's under control, but once it starts to overgrow, as I said, it can produce a host of symptoms that would confuse anybody. The symptoms would range from fatigue to allergies to chemical sensitivities to rashes to arthritic symptoms. It just goes on and on and on. Asthma. It's very typical that kids with autism will develop Candida at a young age due to the vaccinations, which affect them. And once they develop this, then they develop allergies. They develop a condition called leaky gut syndrome, which is better known as intestinal permeability, which means that their gut is porous. And it allows toxins that normally would be barred from entering your bloodstream to then flow in from the intestines. And that sets off a whole inflammatory cascade of all types of autoimmune problems.
Right.
So what Candida can do is very complicated, even though it's a very simple little organism.
30% is your estimate of that. What's the breakdown between men and women?
I would say it's probably leans more towards women, because the man doesn't have the same equipment. Women have a vaginal area, and the vaginal area is another area of a mucous membrane which could harbor Candida. Men don't have that, but quite a lot of men get Candida like as a jock problem, a jock itch, or whatever you want to call it. They typically get like a groin rash, which is Candida.
So it can manifest externally, but the main problem that you're tackling really is the internal intestinal issue. I think that's what you're mainly treating.
Yes, Candida can manifest as a rash which occurs in the creases of your skin or the folds of your skin, because in that area it's dark and it's moist. It can manifest as a vaginal yeast infection, as jock itch. People can get Candida in the anal area and they get rectal itching and they have an infection there. But the main problem that we're concerned with is the overgrowth in the intestines, because the overgrowth from the intestines spread to cause those other problems. The overgrowth in your gut spreads to cause the vaginal yeast infection. It also seems to spread to cause fungal nails. When you get fungal infections on your toes and your fingers, those people almost exclusively have an overgrowth in their gut. It's actually very hard to find somebody with any kind of external manifestation of Candida that doesn't have the overgrowth in their intestinal tract.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the two kind of go
Hand in hand.
together. Is it often misdiagnosed, or is modern,
Totally
medicine?
misdiagnosed. It's one of the most misdiagnosed issues we've ever had in
Okay.
medicine, because medical doctors don't have really they don't have a sense for it. And I think one of the reasons why is because antibiotics cause the problem. You could imagine the calamity it would be if everybody who had Candida, who lost time from work and lost this and that, decided to go ahead and sue their doctor for giving them the antibiotics that caused the condition in the first place. So they're not that receptive to it, unfortunately. And to treat Candida, there's a lot of attention needs to be placed on diet and lifestyle, which the average doctor doesn't have time to do. You have to understand that too.
Yeah, and interestingly, I had a medical doctor, actually an emergency room physician, on my podcast. And for those of you interested in this topic, that's well worth listening to if you want to confirm what Dr. Biamonte just said. And he will tell you that he is in a system that forces him often to give antibiotics, and the system really is broken. Doctors are part of a system where people rate them. Our government, somewhat government controlled healthcare now requires feedback that includes patient feedback. And much of the time, that may sound terrific. We like feedback. When we go to Amazon, we want to see that other people liked the thing before we buy it. Unfortunately, too many people go into the hospital or emergency room just wanting a drug. They just want to feel better. They're
They want
not
the magic
interested
bullet.
they want the
They
magic
want the
bullet.
magic bullet. Yeah.
And if the doctor doesn't give the magic bullet, the doctor can lose rating.
Mm-hmm.
And the hospital gets in trouble, and the hospital doesn't look good. And so there's kind of a vicious cycle. And I unfairly summarized that, but it's a very true part of our healthcare system. And I don't remember what episode that was, maybe in the 60s or 70s. But if you just search on blog.nairobi.com, that's a very interesting topic. So Dr. Biamonte, I'm familiar with that. I know that is a problem. And he's certainly not the only doctor on the planet talking about this. But back to Candida. Now, of course, this is a health show. We're very much into being proactive. And if we're dealing with well, do we call it a disease? I guess it's not really a disease to have, or is it a disease?
No, I would call it a disease. Based on the definition of a disease, it certainly is. But it's an iatrogenic disease would be the under in parenthesis. I would put iatrogenic disease is doctor-induced, because it can be caused by antibiotics, steroids. There's a whole host of medications that can cause it.
Okay, so there's two aspects that now I want to dive into. And one is being proactive. How do we avoid it? And number two is, if you have it, how do you treat it? So let's start with, you've already alluded to a few, but for those listening who don't want Candida and to avoid ever getting it, what are the main things we have to pay attention to?
It's how a person uses antibiotics. When you take antibiotics, you want to make sure it's something that's absolutely necessary. You don't want to, the Merck Manual, which is a book that every doctor has in his, it's like the guide, handbook to the human body. Every doctor has the Merck Manual. Right in the Merck Manual, it says that candidiasis is caused by the indiscriminate use of antibiotics, broad spectrum antibiotics, which wipe out your intestinal flora. So you want to make sure if you have to take an antibiotic, it's absolutely necessary. And then if you have to take an antibiotic, you want to take some type of antifungal at the same time. Most people, the prominent thought is you would take probiotics, but that unfortunately doesn't work, because the antibiotic just kills the probiotic. You want to take a natural antibiotic with the antibiotic to make sure that you keep the yeast colonies under control. And there's plenty of those you can buy in the health food store for that purpose. I don't recommend using those for a full commitment of treating Candida, because they won't work in that way. But if you're just going to use it for a temporary, like, let's say, prophylactic means of trying to keep the Candida under control while you're taking the antibiotic, that's fine to do. And those are things like caprylic acid, undesolenic acid, grapefruit seed extract, oregano oil. Any of those natural supplements can suffice.
Fantastic. And so is antibiotics the only culprit?
No, steroid medications, many hormones, estrogens, prednisones will cause it. Antacids will cause it. If you take antacids at a high enough dose long enough, they'll cause candida because they lower the acidity of your digestive tract, and that's what candida likes. It likes an alkaline intestinal tract to overgrow in.
Very interesting. Okay. Now, once the problem has manifest, does it become chronic?
Yes, it does. It becomes very chronic. It's because once that balance is disturbed, there's an interesting mechanism that candida has. The mechanism that candida has, which is for its own pro survival, is that it repels probiotics. So when you really get down deep into your gut, you have candida there, and when you take the probiotic to try to oust the candida, the probiotic is repelled by the candida. It pushes it away and stops it from being able to attach itself and re-inoculating the intestinal tract. That's the problem with candida, or its genius, if you want to look at it, depending on your viewpoint. So in order to really, this is why probiotics don't work. Now, see, if probiotics worked the way it's claimed, we wouldn't be talking right now. I wouldn't see 60, 70 patients a week who've been suffering with candida for 10 plus years. That's just what it is. In order for the probiotic to work, you've got to first remove the majority of the candida, and especially the candida that's very deep in the intestinal tract. That's the trick.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify, and you push back on me if I get this wrong, but when you say probiotics don't work, I mean, you're talking specifically, I mean, probiotics are naturally occurring in our diet, or
Right.
should
I'm,
be.
I'm talking very specifically about the marketing that probiotics are going to
Yes.
cure your candida, your chronic candida problem. That's what I'm
Very
talking
good.
about.
Very good. I just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
people didn't start to think to not take probiotics.
Those probiotics are,
Well,
are the first step of your immune system. The very first part
yeah,
of your immune system involves probiotics.
right.
Probiotics are there to repel germs and bacteria. They help your body absorb vitamins. They synthesize certain vitamins for you. Probiotics are an absolute essential. Without probiotics, we would be a very sickly species. So probiotics are very necessary.
Okay, now I'm going to go backwards just a little bit because I want to make sure we're really clear here. Because it's something that's very difficult to diagnose, there could well be people who are listening who have candida and don't even know it, and
Mhm.
maybe they're tackling something else, maybe they think they've got something different. So just review again, just make it clear for us, how could a person, what type of symptoms would a person have that could be candida, that they ought to go and get some kind of a candida test, or just figure out whether they really have it or not? What are the symptoms?
This is what the person wants to do. They want to see if they can locate on a timeline of their life a period of time where they suddenly started to develop fatigue, brain fog, bloating, gas, constipation or diarrhea, and then anything else accompanying that, like rashes or allergies or something of that nature, because those are the initial symptoms of candida: fatigue, brain fog, uh, then digestive problems, and then you can have additional things which are very common, like rashes, are a very common issue with candida. Food intolerances. If they can find a timeline of when that began, they want to go to the beginning of that point and try to see what happened right before that. Identify whether or not they were put on a medication, were they in a car accident, something of that effect. And that's how you can substantiate just from an empirical way that you have candida. Here you have a known source of producing candida. Here you have the symptoms that followed. That could give you a pretty good idea.
Okay. And then is this something that is that falls pretty squarely in the functional medicine arena, where the
Yes,
functional doctors?
yeah, it absolutely does. But the problem is that most doctors fail at treating it. This is why I've become well known and world famous for dealing with this problem, is because doctors fail to treat it correctly, because there are certain logics and axioms in addressing and dealing with candida that doctors, despite my articles in my books, they haven't grasped yet and really taken into a standard practice. One of the first ones is when you're using antifungals, you must rotate the antifungal. If you expose the candida to the same antifungal, whether it's an herb or a medicine, for longer than 21 days, the Candida becomes drug resistant and the medication no longer works. The story we hear all the time from people is, I went to Dr. So-and-so, he put me on nystatin, he put me on ketoconazole, he put me on Sporanox. I was doing great for a couple of months, and then all of a sudden, all the symptoms started to come back. So he raised the dose of the medicine, and then it made it even worse. So Candida is very mutative. It easily becomes a super strain when you keep hitting it with the same drug. That's the first mistake. Second mistake they make is using probiotics too early. The probiotics don't re-inoculate, as we've been discussing, until you get rid of the majority of the Candida, especially the deep-seated Candida in the gut.
How much does nutrition come into play here?
It comes into play from the viewpoint that when you starve the Candida, and the Candida needs carbs and sugars to stay alive. If you starve it, it becomes more amenable to dying when you hit it with the right program of supplements or medicines. But theoretically, the Candida could stay alive even if you went on a fast for 30 days. Candida could still stay alive because it would tap into your little capillaries in your intestinal tract and draw out your glucose. So it could still stay alive. But diet is kind of more to manage it and to help it die. Diet's never going to cure it for that fact. That what Candida does after you die is it helps your body decompose. That's actually one of the practical aspects of the organism. What is embalming fluid? Embalming fluid is nothing but a big whopping dose of an antifungal substance.
Right. Right.
So when you start looking at it from all these different angles, you get a bigger picture of what's going on with Candida and what it's doing. So nutrition helps you kill it. It helps stave off some of the symptoms. It stops the symptoms from becoming acute by, dramatically feeding the Candida. But other than that, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. Although overall, you'd have to say the people that are more prone to Candida are the people with a really bad diet, a high sugar American, like what we call SAD, the standard American diet.
Yeah. What are your dietary guidelines? And again, I know that's a really big question, but just a summary of what you try to get people to do.
Well, the first thing is, if the person has leaky gut, we have to take them off raw vegetables and fermented foods, because raw vegetables and fermented foods aggravate leaky gut. The people with leaky gut very typically also have Candida, so they have to follow it. Yet not only that diet, but they have to be watching their carbs and sugars. Then the level of Candida they have, which we determine based on the testing that we do, which is very unique. That level tells us what load of carbohydrates they can tolerate per day. So we generally have a 0 to 40 grams. We have 40 to 80 grams, and then we have 80 to 120 grams, depending on how severe your Candida is. Then your blood type can also function as an indicator. Blood type O's can handle the carbs a little bit easier than the A's and some of the other ones.
And each of those ranges, even your top range there of carbs, is still considered low, especially compared to the standard American diet. So we're talking, that sounds like it's a very important part of dealing with Candida, is really cutting back on those sugars.
Unless you're talking to somebody who's paleo or keto, yeah, that's true. That's true. It is considered pretty low. But when you start studying people, like, and the blood types and where the blood types manifest from, with your hunter-gatherer who's the type O, that range of carbohydrates isn't too outrageous for them. But when you look at a blood type A, who's more of a farmer, and they come from Asia, they're living a lot on grains and things like that. So that would be much lower for them.
Yeah, that would be quite an adjustment. I think that'd be quite an adjustment for the vast majority of people. Like you said, unless they already know keto, then they know those ranges. They've learned how to figure it out. But I mean, most people, that's like one milkshake has 900 calories, and I'm not sure how many grams of carbs, but it's blows that range out of the water. So people don't realize what a lifestyle change that would be.
It's interesting, Dave, that when people advance through the Candida diet, even though this is not necessarily true, it doesn't have to be, people will undoubtedly somewhere have the cognition that they never want to go back to eating the way they did before. Even your most staunch advocate of eating yodels, and Wonder Bread, they will say to themselves somewhere along the line, I feel so much better now. I'm never going back to eating that way. But and that's not even necessary, because you can have, once we cure the person of Candida and we reestablish their flora, we rebalance their hormones, we get everything back in balance, they can have carbs again. So it's not necessary, but you just can't be that abusive with it.
How long does the process take, Dr. Biamonte? Once you've identified that the person has Candida, what does the regimen look like, and for how long?
We always give it a year. And why we give it a year is because eliminating the Candida takes about 6 months, and it's done in different stages or phases. So that's 6 months. To get your friendly bacteria back in and get it good and solid is another 3 months. So now we're up to 8 months. Now you have to add in life, because people go on vacations, they have weddings, they have birthdays, they get into accidents, they have all kinds of things that happen. And because of that, people will relapse here and there during the treatment. So we throw in a couple of more months, we'll round it off to a year.
What is the initial test like? How do you determine whether it's a Candida problem or something else?
We have 3 tests predominantly that we use. The most interesting one is the one that I developed myself, which is a urine test. It's self-administered. The person does this urine test themselves at home using a first morning urine sample. It has 6 different parts, but 3 primary parts. One part of the test measures free radicals, which your body's releasing from Candida. These are free radicals that actually are being produced by Candida in your body. The other part of the test measures protein putrefaction coming from bad bacteria and parasites, which will be synergistic with Candida. And then the other part of the test measures actual protein waste products from the Candida itself that you're urinating out. And the interesting thing about this test, it's real time. So you're getting to see the Candida activity at that exact moment. It's not like a blood test, which is merely telling you you have antibodies against Candida. It's telling you what's actually happening at that time. And because there is a lysis that occurs, lysis means the breakdown of cells or tissues. When Candida goes through a lysis from the program killing it, those cells break down, they sort of explode, they release their innards, so to speak, and that shows up in the urine test because more of that Candida protein suddenly appears. So when we kill the Candida, the test reacts to it. We see the protein from Candida in the urine rise. And that's a big help, because most people do these programs blind. They just do it based on their symptoms and how they feel. When we're treating a person, we have this urine test they can do at home that's actually going to tell them whether or not they have an increase in Candida, dead Candida, let's say, and showing up in their urine.
Is it like a color strip, or how does
it
show?
They're vials. They're vials that you add urine and then reagents to, a couple of drops of chemicals, and then it will appear. You'll get a change within about a minute to 5, depending on the test. That tells us what we need to know.
And do you sell these tests?
Yes, we sell them to our patients. We don't sell them to non-patients. We tried doing that once, and we had so many phone calls from people asking us questions that it proved not to be practical, because there's a certain interpretation you have to learn to each test, and then there's, what do you do with this information now? So we find it really only works for us if we keep it within our patients, because otherwise we get overwhelmed with phone calls of people who are looking for help but don't really know what to do.
Right. Okay. Well, this has been super interesting. I'm sure there's more questions I could ask, but in the end, I mean, this seems like a pretty cut and dried sort of a situation where this is a very specific thing. 30% of Americans, you estimate, have this. And it's the type of thing that is hard to diagnose. Once diagnosed, we're looking at a year of treatment. And that treatment, obviously you're here on my podcast. I'm in Utah. You're in, are you in New York right now?
No, not in New York right now. I'm in Tampa.
You're in Tampa. So I assume you can treat people remotely.
We only treat people remotely now. For the last 7 years, we've only treated people remotely. I did my first consultation by phone, I think it was in 1987. And ever since then, it's been, that population of our practice has been growing more and more, because relatives and friends would try to tell their friends, well, you sound like, to me, you have Candida. That's what I just got treated for. You need to find a doctor to help you. They would go to doctors who wouldn't be successful, and then they would end up coming back to us, and we would talk to them on the phone and do their treatment plans by phone. Now with the internet, we do everything over the internet.
What's your website?
It's health-truth.com. That's the main website, www.health-truth.com. And then there's also the New York City Candida Doctor website.
New York City Candida Doctor.
Right.
Website. .com?
Yes.
With the in it?
Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, you've been in the health industry your whole life, I assume.
Yeah, pretty much since I was about 23.
And you're a functional doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, although you spend most of your time helping other people with their health, I want to ask you, is there, you know, we're all human. We all mess up. We all have bad times. And I wonder if there's a time in your life where you have been at a low point, where someone else has helped you, where there's been something that has just been like an epiphany, where someone came along at the right time, a book, a mentor, something, and that helped you to raise your life to a higher level. Have you had that type of experience in your own health?
In 1982, when I was going to naturopathic school, I was a musician. Originally, I got my first degree in college was as a musician. I was a guitarist and a composer, and all my friends were musicians. So in 1982, when I was just in school studying all this stuff, I was performing, teaching my students, everything like this, and I started getting tremors in my muscles. And it was starting to affect my guitar playing because my fingers would tremor and wouldn't respond. And I had a friend who was a pianist having the same problem. Now, both of us at that time were vegans. We had both been vegans for about 5 years.
Okay.
So I went to school that day and I asked my teacher, I said, you know, my friend and I are vegans and we're noticing we're getting this weird thing. Now, the man happened to be Dr. Biamonte Sr. I was so fortunate that I can't believe it to this day. Dr. Biamonte is the man who wrote all the books on blood type diet.
Right.
Now, this was not his son. His son made the books popular. This was his father who actually did all the research. So he looked at me and he said, gee, you've been vegan for 5 years. And he asked me, well, he says, you're Italian, you're Sicilian. Shaking his head, he was going, he said, you know your blood type? And I said, no, I don't know my blood type. So he said, I'm gonna take a guess here. He says, I want you and your friend for the next week to eat liver every day. And then come back next week and tell me how you feel. Well, after 3 days of eating this liver, all these symptoms were gone.
Wow.
Now, he assumed that we were blood type O's.
Yeah.
In which case, being a vegetarian is the total opposite. And it's a funny thing because I have people, when they used to come to my office, they'd be sitting in the waiting room and I'd hear them talking. And this one person would be saying, well, he wants me to be a vegetarian. I don't know if I can do that. And then the other person would turn to him and say, really? He put me on the Atkins diet. He's got me eating all this meat. What's going on here?
Yeah.
And the difference was their blood type. I was using the blood type, the diet appropriate to their blood type.
Right.
So I would say that's my testimony, not only of as you're saying, someone coming in to help me, but it's also a testimony of how the blood type diets really have a lot of truth to them.
It sounds like it's something you're still teaching in your practice.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. After that experience, I could never, I always start with that as the foundation. When we finish the person up on the Candida treatment, and we're then rebalancing all the vitamins and their hormones and anything that they may be imbalanced in, we always use their blood type diet as the foundation.
Okay.
So if the person is a type O, we put them more on the paleo diet, and then any deficiencies or imbalances they have, we then build on top of that. And the same thing would be true of if it's a blood type B, we put them on a Mediterranean diet, and then we adjust everything based on their test. Same thing with an A or a double A, which is a brand new blood type relatively.
And is it Eat Right for Your Type? Is that the most famous book?
Yes, that's it. That is the book.
Okay, fantastic. I should pay more attention to that. You know that. I know it. I mean, I get what I mean is I get the idea. I'm not educated in it, and it probably would make a big difference in my life if I actually would adopt the concept and pay more attention.
It would help. It would help. I'm going to tell you that we have found there are people who are hybrids here and there. Like there are occasional type A's we find that we see on their blood work that they have a particular chemistry called a BUN, which stands for blood urea nitrogen. The BUN in your blood work tells you the total amount of amino acid pools that you have available in your body. And you will occasionally find type A's with chronically low BUNs, and they've got to eat red meat like once or twice a week to keep it up. Those are some of the hybrids you find that break the rules a little. But for the most part, most of the people would benefit from applying the blood type diet to their life and their lifestyle. Most people will benefit. And it also explains a lot when you actually start reading into it, because you'll see how people handle stress is different. A blood type O and an A handle stress totally different. And you'll actually see idiosyncrasies of people showing up based on their blood type, which is really interesting.
Well, fantastic. And as a total sidebar, do you still play guitar?
Yes, I still do. Absolutely. I do. I was a classical guitarist in college, but I made a living teaching kids how to play like Jimi Hendrix.
Interesting. Well, I've always loved guitar, but I've never put the time and energy into it. And this last December, me and my boys all went up to Guitar Center, and we all got a really nice guitar. I got a nice Taylor guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been playing every day.
Oh, wow. Great.
And I'm taking lessons.
Very good.
And right now I'm working on Prince's acoustic version of Cream that he played at Albert Hall.
Right. I know.
Very funky, cool blues. That's acoustic cool guitar piece.
Good for you.
And that's what I'm working on. So yeah. And that's pretty interesting that you started off in music and ended up as a doctor.
Well, what was interesting about it is it's both are very mathematical in ways. Like in music, anyone who studied J.S. Bach, you immediately know there's a lot of math involved in his music. And in doctoring too, or in medicine, there's a certain amount of math that's involved in terms of patterns that occur and chemistries. So there is a wild similarity in them.
Interesting. I can see that. And I can see where that would make sense. And as a matter of fact, we just had this discussion recently. I was chatting with someone who has a terminal illness, actually, just last week. We were chatting with them, and it was kind of a serious discussion. And they're in the phase of finding the best care for the condition that they have. And I told him, I said, look, I can't prove this, but I have a theory that among medical professionals, they're all good. They've put the years in, and these are people that have dedicated themselves to a profession that's helping other people. But my theory is this, that among the 100%, there's about 20% that not only put in the time and effort, but have the art. They have the gift. They are true healers. I said, and if I was you, that's the person I'd be looking for, not just the pedigree, but also the art to go with the science, the healing ability that somehow is intuitive and different and unique, and the art form of the science.
What you find out very quickly is that when you're looking for a healer or a doctor who's approaching it also as an art, they're more looking at symptom versus cause. So you want to beware of any doctor who tells you, we don't know why it is. We don't know why, we can only handle your symptoms. You always want to find a doctor who's trying to find the cause.
Right.
Because that's more how I grew up after naturopathic school, is I worked with engineers. When I worked at Grumman on the space project, all of the doctors I worked with were system analysis engineers. And they taught me, even though I'm not an engineer, they taught me the discipline and the concept of engineering. And we applied it to the human body, you see. So I'm very grateful that I was in that situation where I could then take on the viewpoint. When I look at the body, I look at it as an engineer. We have systems, we have subsystems, all of them relate to each other. There are feedback loops where they're all communicating. So I know what's really going on. You really want to stay away from a doctor who, when you ask him, well, what causes this? He says, we don't know. We're not interested in finding out. It's when you have that kind of a doctor, he's a pill pusher. He's only going to give you a medication to control your symptoms. He's never going to try to find what the real cause of your problem is, because the cause is there. Just because it's unknown right now, it doesn't mean it's not there.
Great advice. I love that. Well, Dr. Biamonte, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it, Dave.
Yeah, for those of you listening, if you or someone you love potentially has a Candida issue, Dr. Biamonte may be the best person on the planet you could talk to at the moment. And
That's
Dr.
true.
Biamonte, one more time, what's your website? How would they reach out to you?
Well, you can do a search for my name, which is easy, or you can go to health-truth.com, and that's my main website, and that can lead you to all the other websites that I have.
Okay. Well, again, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
This is Dave Sherwin wishing you all health and success.